Most readers treat the story of Abram as a sudden, fresh start, a clean break in the book of Genesis, where the history of Israel simply begins. God points to a man in the ancient Middle East, tells him to walk, and the story of faith is born. At first glance, it feels like an isolated event. It is not. God does not choose Abram in a vacuum. The call of this one man is not a random geographic relocation. It is a direct, theological response to a human disaster. To understand Genesis chapter 12, you have to look carefully at the shadows left behind in Genesis chapter 11. In chapter 11, humanity gathers together on a plain in Shinar. They do not want to spread out over the earth as God had previously commanded. Instead, they decide to build a city and a tower with its top reaching into the heavens. But the architecture is not the actual problem. The problem is the motivation underneath the bricks. The builders say, "Let us build ourselves a city and a tower, and let us make a name for ourselves." It is the ultimate vision of human empire. Security through human effort, identity through massive achievement, survival through centralizing power. They believed that if they built high enough and stood close enough together, they would never need to depend on the unseen God again. And God scatters them. He confuses their language, stopping the construction, and the great empire of Babel collapses. That is how chapter 11 ends, with a broken, divided humanity, fractured by their own arrogant ambition. The world is scattered. The nations are separated. If you are reading the biblical narrative from the beginning, a profound tension hangs over the text at this exact moment. How will God rescue a scattered world? Will he send another flood? Will he force the nations back together? Instead, the perspective shifts away from the ruins of the Great Tower and zooms in on a single, ordinary family living in Mesopotamia. Chapter 12 opens with a quiet voice speaking to one man. The text says, "Now the Lord said to Abram, 'Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you.'" This is where a massive biblical pattern begins to unlock. God does not save the world by building a better, stronger human empire. He begins his rescue mission by calling a man to walk away from one. Abram is the direct opposite of Babel. Where the builders of the tower wanted to settle down and fortify their lives, God tells Abram to leave his home, become vulnerable, and live in a tent. Where the builders strive to make a great name for themselves through human power, God tells Abram to surrender, promising that God himself will make his name great. The contrast is absolute. Not human achievement, but divine promise. Not building up to heaven, but stepping out into the unknown. But to understand the sheer weight of what God was asking of this man, we have to look closely at the soil he was being told to leave behind. Genesis chapter 11 tells us exactly where Abram lived. Ur of the Chaldeans. For a modern reader, that is usually just an obscure name on a map. We tend to imagine Abram as a lifelong desert wanderer, a nomad living in a dusty tent on the edge of nowhere, waiting for a divine encounter. But history and archaeology paint a completely different picture of Abram's starting point. Ur was not a quiet wilderness outpost. It was a thriving, massive metropolis in ancient Mesopotamia. It was an epicenter of trade, agriculture, and culture, sitting near the Euphrates River. Excavations have shown that the city had advanced irrigation systems, two-story brick homes, and a complex economy. If you lived in Ur, you lived at the absolute peak of ancient civilization. You had physical security. You had agricultural stability. You had the protection of a powerful system. But Ur was not just a commercial giant. It was a spiritual stronghold. The book of Joshua gives us a critical detail about Abram's family that the book of Genesis leaves quietly in the background. In Joshua chapter 24, verse 2, the text says, "Long ago your ancestors, including Terah the father of Abraham and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates River and worshipped other gods." Abram did not grow up worshiping Yahweh. He grew up in a culture saturated with ancient idolatry. Ur was the dominant center of worship for the Mesopotamian moon god. At the heart of the city stood a massive ziggurat, a towering, stepped pyramid stretching up toward the sky, dominating the entire skyline. The architecture of Ur looked exactly like the ambition of Babel. It was a man-made mountain, built by human hands to connect earth and heaven, designed to secure the favor of the gods through religious ritual. This is the world Abram knew. His family was deeply embedded in this system. His identity was tied to this land. His future was secured by its massive walls. He was not a blank slate. And he was not looking for a new religion. He was a comfortable citizen of a thriving empire. And then, the voice of the true God breaks through the noise of the city. God does not tell Abram to stay in Ur and start a religious revival. He does not tell him to build a competing ziggurat to honor Yahweh. He tells him to leave. To follow this unknown God, Abram had to forfeit the protection of the greatest city in his world. He had to trade the massive, visible security of the moon god's temple for an invisible promise from a God who had no temple at all. To step outside the walls of Ur was to become an outsider. In the ancient world, you did not easily survive on your own. You survived because you belonged to a city, a tribe, and a local deity. To leave those three things was to step into social and economic vulnerability. The departure is not just physical, it is spiritual. God is not merely moving a man from one piece of real estate to another. He is extracting a man from the psychology of Babel. He is pulling him out of a world that believes survival depends on building walls and making a great name for yourself. God is asking Abram to unlearn everything his culture taught him about safety. Abram was not being asked to leave a quiet, struggling desert tent. He was being asked to walk away from the peak of human security. And the way God phrases the command makes the departure absolute. The command God gives to Abram is not just a general instruction to travel. It is precise, it is systematic, and it is severe. In Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, God says to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house." Notice the rhythm of that sentence. It is not one command. It is a sequence of three distinct severings. And with each step, the circle gets smaller, more intimate, and more dangerous to leave. First, God says to leave your country. This is the geographic severing. Abram is told to walk away from the national identity and political protection of Mesopotamia. He is leaving the land of his ancestors, the soil he knows, the economy he understands. Second, God says to leave your kindred. This is the tribal severing. In the ancient Middle East, you did not exist as an isolated individual. Your tribe was everything. Your kindred was your law enforcement, your insurance policy, and your social standing. If a famine hit, the tribe shared resources. If an enemy attacked, the tribe defended you. To leave your kindred was to forfeit your only defense against a hostile world. Third, God says to leave your father's house. This is the deepest, most personal severing of all. The father's house was the core unit of ancient society. It represented inheritance, daily provision, and generational memory. As long as you remained in your father's house, you knew exactly who you were and what belonged to you. To step away from the father's house was to sever the final cord of earthly identity. Abram was walking away from his secure inheritance in Ur to inherit an empty horizon. When modern readers look at this list, we often read it through the lens of modern individualism. Today, leaving your hometown, moving away from your extended family, and starting a new life is seen as a normal, healthy part of growing up. We celebrate it. We call it independence. But in the ancient world, independence was not a celebration. Independence was a death sentence. To be disconnected from your land, your tribe, and your father was to become a wanderer, an exile, a vagabond entirely exposed to the elements, to bandits, and to starvation. God is not just asking Abram to take a long trip. He is systematically dismantling every layer of human reliance. He is stripping Abram down to nothing but a voice. The text is making a profound theological point right at the beginning of the biblical story. Faith is not adding God to your existing security system. Faith is stepping out of your security system to discover that God is enough. Abram had to empty his hands of what he could build, so that God could fill his hands with what only heaven could give. He was giving up the known for the unknown. He was letting go of the massive, visible protection of the moon god's city to follow a God who had not even given him a map. And that brings us to the second half of the command. God tells him to go to the land that I will show you. Not the land I have shown you. The land I will show you. Future tense. The destination is hidden. The only thing clear is the departure. This is the terrifying reality of the call. God was systematically dismantling Abram's entire safety net. He was asking him to step into the exact vulnerability that the builders of Babel had been so desperately trying to avoid. But what God promises to give him in return is not just basic survival. It is a direct reversal of the greatest failure in the previous chapter. In Genesis chapter 11, the human race had a very specific goal. They gathered on the plain of Shinar, looked at the earth around them, and said, "Let us make a name for ourselves." That phrase is the beating heart of human empire. To make a name for yourself in the ancient world was not just about fame. It was about survival. Kings built massive statues of themselves so their names would live on. Empires carved their victories into stone so the gods would remember them. The builders of Babel were terrified of being scattered, terrified of disappearing into the dust of history, so they turned to architecture to solve their anxiety. They used bricks and tar to build a monument to their own significance. But look carefully at the contrast in Genesis chapter 12. God commands Abram to walk away from everything that gives him a name. He walks away from his father's house, which held his genealogy. He walks away from his city, which held his citizenship. He becomes a nobody, an exile, a man without a country. And right at the moment of total obscurity, God gives him a promise. In verse 2, God says, "I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing." Pause for a second and look at the movement. This is not a random choice of words. The exact thing the builders of Babel exhausted themselves trying to achieve, God simply hands to a man in the desert. A great name. The builders tried to seize it from the earth. God hands it down from heaven. The builders tried to construct it with bricks. God builds it with a promise. Abram does not lay a single stone. He does not gather an army. He does not conquer a neighboring city. He does absolutely nothing to earn his reputation. He simply listens, packs his tent, and begins to walk. This is the profound theological reversal that anchors the entire biblical story. God does not reward human striving for power. He rewards the quiet surrender of a leaving man. The text is showing us that a name made by human hands will eventually crumble, just like the Tower of Babel. But a name given by God will endure forever. God tells Abram that through him, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. The blessing that humanity lost in the Garden of Eden and the unity they tried to force at Babel will now be restored through one traveling family. It is a beautiful, sweeping promise. It sounds like the perfect beginning to a triumphant story. God is going to build a massive nation, give them a great name, and change the world. But there is a problem. It is a massive, structural problem that threatens to collapse the entire narrative before it even begins. God promises a great nation. He promises a great name. He promises descendants that will eventually outnumber the stars. But there is one glaring detail sitting quietly in the text that makes this entire promise look biologically impossible. Pause for a second and see what has emerged. So far, this has not been a random set of details. The command to leave Ur was a direct reversal of the Empire of Babel. The promise of a great name was God handing down what humanity had failed to build. The pattern is becoming harder to miss. God is actively stripping away human ability so that he can build something entirely new. But right in the middle of this massive promise, there is a quiet, devastating reality. God has just promised Abram a great nation, descendants as numerous as the dust of the earth, and a legacy that will bless all the families of the world. But just before chapter 12 begins, the text drops a crucial detail. In Genesis chapter 11, verse 30, the narrator introduces Abram's wife with a short, heavy sentence. It says, "Now Sarai was barren. She had no child." To a modern reader, that sounds like a sad biological footnote before the main story begins. It is not. It is the theological foundation of the entire covenant. God tells a man whose wife cannot have children that he is going to be the father of an uncountable multitude. In the ancient Middle East, barrenness was viewed as a finality. It was a dead end. It meant the erasure of your future, the end of your father's house, and the quiet death of your legacy. In a culture that survived through family expansion, a barren womb was a closed door that no human hand could force open. But in the biblical narrative, barrenness is not a dead end. It is a canvas. It is the empty space where God prepares to do his deepest work. Look at the brilliant contrast the text is setting up. The builders of Babel had everything. They had bricks, they had tar, they had engineering, and they had thousands of strong, capable hands. They represented peak human ability, and they failed. Abram and Sarai have nothing. They have an empty tent, an aging timeline, and a biological impossibility. They represent absolute human inability. And that is exactly the point the author of Genesis is making. The family of God will not be an achievement of human strength. It will be a miracle of divine creation. God does not start his grand rescue mission with a young, fertile, powerful couple in the prime of their lives. He starts it with a man and a woman who cannot possibly manufacture the promise on their own. If Abram and Sarai could have children easily, then the nation of Israel would just be another human accomplishment. It would be just one more empire built by human genetics and human effort. It would be another Babel. But because Sarai is barren, the existence of the nation can only be explained by the direct, miraculous intervention of Yahweh. God is taking them back to the beginning. In Genesis chapter 1, God created the heavens and the earth out of nothing. Now, in Genesis chapter 12, God is going to create a new people out of a barren womb. The same God who spoke life into the cosmic void is about to speak life into Sarai's emptiness. He is not just giving Abram a child. He is showing the world that his kingdom is built on grace, not human capacity. The nation would not begin with human strength, but with divine creation out of empty spaces. But God does not just ask Abram to trust him with his family line. He asks him to trust him with his geography. When God calls Abram out of Ur, the hardest part of the command is not what he has to leave behind. It is what he is not allowed to see ahead. In Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, God says, "Go to the land that I will show you." He does not name the land. He does not provide a travel itinerary. He does not promise a smooth journey or friendly borders. God demands total departure. But he only provides partial revelation. In the ancient world, you did not travel without a clear destination. The wilderness was dangerous. You needed to know where the water was. You needed to know which kings controlled which territories. You needed a map. But God does not give Abram a map. He gives him a voice. The distance from Ur of the Chaldeans to the land of Canaan is roughly 1,000 miles if you follow the ancient trade routes along the Euphrates River. It was not a brief expedition. It was a permanent relocation across a massive, unforgiving landscape. Every step Abram took was a step further away from the known and a step deeper into the absolute unknown. Centuries later, the author of the New Testament book of Hebrews reflects on this exact moment. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8, the writer summarizes the entire journey in one brilliant sentence. It says, "By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going, not knowing where he was going." To a modern mind, that sounds reckless. It sounds irresponsible. But in the biblical imagination, this is the exact definition of faith. Faith is not having a perfect blueprint for your life. Faith is trusting the architect enough to walk without one. Look at the profound contrast between Abram and the world he left behind. The builders of Babel wanted to see their security. They wanted to look up at their brick tower and know they were safe. They demanded visible proof of their own power. They lived entirely by sight. Abram has nothing to look at. He only has something to listen to. He lives entirely by hearing. He has to wake up every morning, roll up his tent, and wait for God to tell him which direction to walk. If God stops speaking, Abram is completely lost. This is the vulnerability of the covenant. God is removing every single external support so that Abram has to lean entirely on the word of Yahweh. He is unlearning the empire. He is learning that true security is not a high wall, a strong city, or a great personal achievement. True security is the presence of God in the middle of nowhere. And as Abram begins to walk, something massive begins to take shape in the narrative. Abram is not just a historical figure taking a trip. He is becoming a template. He is establishing a rhythm that the rest of Scripture is going to repeat over and over again. Notice the pattern that has just emerged. A man is living inside a powerful, idolatrous human empire. God calls him out of that empire. The man leaves his former security, steps into the wilderness, and must rely entirely on the voice of God to survive. This is not just Abram's story. This exact sequence, leaving the human empire to walk into the wilderness with God, does not stop with Abram. It becomes the foundational architecture for the rest of the Bible. The departure of Abram is not just a single historical event. It is the first chord in a symphony that will echo through the rest of Scripture. Once you see this pattern, you cannot unsee it. God is establishing the absolute blueprint for redemption. To be saved by God means to be pulled out of human empire and led into the vulnerability of his promise. Look at what happens hundreds of years after Abram. His descendants find themselves trapped inside another massive human system, Egypt. Egypt is the new Babel. Pharaoh is an arrogant king trying to secure his own legacy by forcing slaves to build monuments out of mud and brick. And when God decides to rescue his people, he does not arm them to overthrow Pharaoh. He does not tell them to conquer the Egyptian empire from the inside. He tells them to leave. The Exodus is simply the call of Abram playing out on a national scale. A massive group of people must walk away from the visible security of the world's greatest superpower, step into a barren wilderness, and trust a God who guides them without a physical map. The pattern repeats again when Israel eventually forgets the covenant. They are conquered and carried off into exile in Babylon. And historically, Babylon was built on the exact same plains of Shinar as the original tower. It is the geographic and spiritual successor to Babel. When the time comes for Israel's restoration, the prophet Isaiah does not tell the people to start a political rebellion against the Babylonian king. He tells them to depart, to leave the empire behind and walk through the desert back to Jerusalem. But the most profound echo of Abram's call happens in the 1st century. Jesus is walking along the shores of the Sea of Galilee. He is about to begin his public ministry. He is about to inaugurate the kingdom of God. He does not go to the religious elite in the Temple of Jerusalem. He does not recruit scholars sitting comfortably inside the established system. He walks up to ordinary fishermen, and his first command to them is not a demand to pass a theological exam. His first command is much simpler. Follow me. Read the accounts in the Gospels carefully. When Peter, Andrew, James, and John hear that call, what do? The text explicitly tells us, they leave their nets, they leave their boats, and in the case of James and John, they leave their father sitting in the boat. They leave their local economy. They leave their kindred. They leave their father's house. They step away from the reliable security of the Galilean fishing industry to follow a rabbi who promises to make them fishers of men, but who gives them absolutely no itinerary for the journey ahead. The architecture of faith remains exactly the same. Jesus is asking his disciples to do exactly what Yahweh asked Abram to do, to let go of the security they can build with their own hands, in order to follow a voice they have just begun to recognize. This is the hidden genius of the biblical narrative. God is entirely consistent. Every time God is about to do something new, he requires his people to step outside the walls of the old. Every great move of God begins with a departure, which brings us to the final, quiet truth of Abram's journey and what it means for the modern reader. The story of Abram is not just ancient history. It is the permanent shape of the Christian life. When the Apostle Paul looks back at this moment thousands of years later, he makes a staggering claim. In the New Testament book of Galatians, chapter 3, Paul says that those who rely on faith are the children of Abraham. He does not say, you have to be born in the ancient Middle East. He does not say you have to share his genetics. He says you have to share his departure. To be part of the family of God is to join the long line of leaving men and women. It is to hear the voice of the same God who spoke in Genesis chapter 12, and to realize that he is still calling people out of the empire. Every single one of us is born in Ur. We are all born into a human system. That tells us survival depends on what we can build, what we can earn, and what we can control. We are taught to secure our own future. We are taught to make a name for ourselves. We are handed the bricks of our culture and told to start stacking them as high as we can. But the call of God always interrupts the construction. God comes to the modern reader with the exact same invitation he gave to the man in Mesopotamia. He asks us to step away from the security of our own achievements. He asks us to walk away from the heavy, exhausting demand of building a tower to prove our worth. Because the truth that Abram discovered in the wilderness is the exact same truth that sits at the center of the gospel. You cannot build your way to heaven. You can only be led there by a voice. Jesus Christ is the ultimate fulfillment of the promise given to Abram. He is the offspring through whom all the families of the earth are finally blessed. But notice how Jesus accomplished it. Jesus did not come to earth and build an earthly empire. He did not settle into a palace and secure a political stronghold. The New Testament tells us that the Son of Man had nowhere to lay his head. Jesus himself lived the pattern of the covenant. He left the ultimate security of his Father's house. He stepped down into the vulnerability of the human wilderness, and he walked in perfect obedience to the voice of his Father, all the way to a cross. Because of that surrender, God gave him the name that is above every name. When we understand this, The story of Abram changes the way we read our own lives. When God asks you to let go of something you have built, when He asks you to step into a season where you cannot see the destination, He is not punishing you. He is doing for you what He did for Abram. He is extracting you from a system that cannot save you. He is pulling you out of an that will eventually collapse, so He can plant your feet on a kingdom that cannot be shaken. We spend so much of our lives asking God to bless the towers we are building. We ask Him to secure our borders, fix our plans, and guarantee our comfort. But the God of the Bible rarely begins by blessing our plans. He begins by asking us to leave them behind. If this study is helping you see Scripture with fresh eyes, consider subscribing so you do not miss the next discovery. The journey is dangerous. The vulnerability is real. But the promise is greater than anything we could ever build with our own hands. The call to Abram was never just a command to take a trip. It was the quiet architecture of redemption.